Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. Last week, U.S. senators spent 3 hours in a hearing room grappling with an urgent problem. The problem is that even though most Americans trust vaccines, feel safer when they and their families have access to them, the Trump appointee in charge of distributing America's shots, he has got his doubts.
This hearing will come to order. Today we meet to hear from U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy.
This hearing was supposed to be about the president's plan to make America healthy again. But for Democrats, Robert F. Kennedy's actions as Secretary of Health and Human Services changed the agenda.
The United States is in the midst of a health care calamity.
This is Senator Ron Wyden.
Last week, most of the senior leadership at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention were fired or they resigned after refusing to bow to Robert Kennedy's unceasing crusade against vaccines. I traveled to Concord.
We've known from the beginning, of course, how RFK Jr. feels about vaccines, but it's worth ticking off everything he's done. So far, he has fired members of a crucial vaccine advisory committee, known as ACIP. That's something he actually promised senators he wouldn't do. Kennedy's FDA has tried to limit who can get COVID shots this fall. The secretary booted the head of the Centers for Disease Control after a disagreement over immunization practices. And then more than 1,000 government scientists demanded Kennedy's resignation. One of the odd things about this hearing, though, is that even after all this, it seems like Kennedy is just getting started.
We are the sickest country in the world. That's why we have to fire people at CDC. They did not do their job. This was their job to keep us healthy.
Thank you,
and I need to fire some of those people to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
You called Kennedy salty when you wrote about it.
I did call him salty. Yes, that's correct. I don't know. I felt like it captured the flavor of what was going on.
Apoorva Mandavilli was watching all this play out for the New York Times.
Because, he was really quite adamant in his positions. And when he was contradicted, he just said things to them like, you're speaking gibberish, or you don't know what you're talking about, or you're making stuff up. And I've just never heard that kind of exchange before in front of the Senate.
Listening in on this hearing, there was this one line of inquiry that I really wanted a straight answer on: whether I'll be able to get a COVID shot this year. The secretary implied it shouldn't be a problem, sort of.
There's no question that it's harder to get the vaccine. I mean, my colleagues have reported on that. CVS and Walgreens are not offering the vaccine at all in about 16 states. And in some other states, they're requiring a prescription. And I've actually heard from readers sending in their experiences and saying, I tried to make an appointment. I was told I needed a prescription. And I heard from somebody yesterday who was over 65 and was having that issue. And so, there's no question that people who meet the criteria, even these very narrow criteria that the FDA has now set forth, they're still not able to get the vaccine. So I'm not exactly sure what Mr. Kennedy means when he says anybody who wants it can get it. That is just not the reality.
All this has left a lot of folks to ask, what about other vaccines?
And now we're seeing skepticism about COVID vaccines spill out into other things, into vaccinations in general. I was just hearing that people are now hesitant to vaccinate their pets because they're worried that their pets might get autism. So, we're going into unprecedented new territory here. However, I do want to point out that there are surveys showing that a majority of Republicans do believe that childhood vaccinations are important. So I'm not sure when RFK Jr. says these things that he's really speaking for the majority of Americans.
Today on the show, how RFK Jr. has put himself between Americans and their vaccines. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This episode is brought to you by Built. Built is revolutionizing how millions think about paying rent by rewarding their members with points and exclusive benefits around their neighborhood every single month. By paying rent through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed toward hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But it doesn't stop there. Built is about making your entire neighborhood more rewarding. You can dine out at your favorite local restaurants and earn additional points, get VIP treatment at certain fitness studios, and enjoy exclusive experiences just for Built members every month. Built is turning a monthly expense into an opportunity to earn rewards and discover the best that your neighborhood has to offer. Your rent is finally working for you. Earn points on rent and around your neighborhood wherever you call home by going to joinbuilt.com/whatnext. That's joinbilt.com/whatnext. Make sure to use the unique URL, joinbilt.com/whatnext. This episode is brought to you by Built. Built is revolutionizing how millions think about paying rent by rewarding their members with points and exclusive benefits around their neighborhood every single month. By paying rent through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed toward hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But it doesn't stop there. Built is about making your entire neighborhood more rewarding. You can dine out at your favorite local restaurants and earn additional points, get VIP treatment at certain fitness studios, and enjoy exclusive experiences just for Built members every month. Built is turning a monthly expense into an opportunity to earn rewards and discover the best that your neighborhood has to offer. Your rent is finally working for you. Earn points on rent and around your neighborhood wherever you call home by going to joinbuilt.com/whatnext. That's joinbilt.com/whatnext. Make sure to use the unique URL, joinbilt.com/whatnext.
Okay, I wonder if we can go back in time a little bit and you can catch me up on everything that's happened in the public health landscape that's led us to where we are right now. Like, it strikes me, it's been a really busy summer, especially when it comes to vaccine policy and personnel. So just tell me what happened.
Okay, I'll give you the highlights, but I will actually start in February. I think that's when things started, is when he took off. As soon as President Trump came into power, actually, they got rid of probationary employees, right? And they lost a lot of people then, hundreds of employees that they needed then. So that made a huge difference already. I spoke to somebody who used to run the data center at the CDC, and she said, that when they lost those probationary employees, they lost very, very valuable expertise that they needed. And then, we came to April and there was the massive, massive reorganization of the Department of Health and Human Services, all the agencies. They lost something like 10,000 employees. Some of them were hired back. So even today, it's like really impossible to figure out exactly how many, because they fired some divisions of people and then realized, oh no, we need that, and brought them back. But regardless, the agency is a lot smaller than it was before. And the other thing that happened is that its budget also got really cut. They got rid of a lot of contracts, which is how the CDC does a lot of its business. So already this agency is sort of ailing. And then in May, things sort of started to heat up with the COVID vaccine.
And it was CDC won't recommend the vaccine for these groups. Not that it wouldn't be available, but that they wouldn't recommend it. But that's important because that's how insurance companies make decisions and things like that, right?
That's correct. Yes. He said that it would no longer be recommended. And basically, that means for a lot of people that it won't be available because, insurance companies really only cover things that the Advisory Committee on Immunization has recommended. And in June, Mr. Kennedy fired 17 people who were serving on this immunization panel. They're all independent experts. And he got rid of them all at the same time. And then a couple of days later, he announced 8 new people that he said were now going to be in the ACIP. And at least one person at the CDC resigned because of that. And, really for the CDC, people ratcheted up their level of concern because it showed them that he meant business, that he was going to make sure that his views would become recommendations, if not policy, in every way. And so I think that really undermined the agency.
Centers for Disease Control workers started telling Apoorva they felt under attack from their boss, RFK Jr., who called the agency a cesspool of corruption. And then, literally, in August, when a gunman opened fire on the CDC's main campus, which terrified employees and killed a police officer. At the time, a new director had just taken over the agency, Susan Menares.
The employees were mostly optimistic about her being there because she is a scientist. She is well-respected. She's an infectious disease expert. So they were quite relieved. And 2.5 weeks later, Mr. Kennedy fired Dr. Menares, said that she was, not in line with the agenda of the administration and that she needed to go. It was all very dramatic because she refused to go. She said she had been confirmed by the Senate and that only President Trump could fire her. Of course, that's sort of a technicality at this point because she has no access, et cetera. But it sort of shows you the level of, disarray in these organizations and in the health department.
And the circumstances of her firing, I think, are really important because they underline how critical being on the same page with RFK Jr. about vaccines is when it comes to being in a leadership position at the Department of Health and Human Services. Like, Dr. Menares wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. She essentially alleges, I was told that the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, this group that RFK Jr. has stocked with loyalists, is going to meet in September, and I need to say that I pre-approve anything they recommend. Like, I'm just on board with it. And I refuse to do that, and that's why Kennedy fired me. Kennedy disputes that, but his story is strange.
It is strange. He said yesterday in the hearing that she was lying, that she had made all of that up, and that he'd never asked her to do any such thing. He also said that he had asked her, this I found really surprising. He said he asked her, "Are you trustworthy?" And she said no.
Which is like nothing anyone would ever do with their boss. Say, "I'm not trustworthy."
Exactly. It's very strange. Why would she say that? Maybe he meant to say she's not trustworthy in that he couldn't trust her. I'm not sure. But it was clear that she wasn't going to go along with it. In her own confirmation, she made it clear that she does support vaccines. She does think that they're important. And I think, as you said, he really wanted somebody in that position who would go along with what he wanted. The rubber stamping the decisions was one part of it, but he also asked her to fire some of these top officials, and she refused. And 3 of them resigned because they were so unhappy with what was going on that they resigned together that week. And then another scientist also resigned. The leader of another center at the CDC also resigned the day before that. And so it was just chaos that week. I would say that 1 week when she was fired and these 4 officials all stepped down was probably the lowest point for the CDC, other than the shooting, of course. And they just now feel like their agency is dying.
And last week, a letter came out asking for RFK Jr.'s resignation, sort of as he went in front of Congress. And it was ostensibly signed by more than 1,000 government health workers, but they actually didn't put their names on it because I guess they were so fearful of losing their jobs. But it just shows the disarray in the health community at this point, and especially around vaccines.
It's 1,000 employees, but it also is many, many scientific and medical organizations who have openly broken with the CDC, who have called for his resignation, and who are saying that they don't trust anything coming out of the CDC. So it's a terrible time to be an American who wants clear answers about public health.
Yeah. I mean, I noted that some of the former members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices who were fired talked to Stat News, And the way they put it was that they said Americans are losing the ability to choose vaccination, which I thought was an interesting way of phrasing things, because it's not like your vaccine is being taken away. It's your choice to have a vaccine. Can you just lay out how this is working? Like, maybe we should look at the example of the COVID vaccine as like, how is policy trickling down to actual access? Because the vaccines exist, but that may not mean you can get them.
Correct. So, I think their word choice, choose to, is also very important, because that's what RFK Jr. has always said, that he wants to give Americans choice and that they should be able to choose whether they want a vaccine or not. So now let's look at the policies that have come into play, given that that's what he said he wanted to do. We have the FDA that, said from the start, as soon as the new leaders came on board, that they were not going to approve vaccines for anybody under 65 without new evidence. And sure enough, that is what has happened. They have approved the vaccine only for people who are older than 65, or for some people who have, other health conditions that may put them at high risk. They're not approving them for pregnant women, healthy pregnant women. And, RFK Jr.'s announcement in May that the CDC would no longer recommend the vaccines also means that insurance companies won't cover it. So now you have a situation where, let's say you are a 50-year-old person who does not have any health conditions but wants to get the vaccine because they believe in it, and maybe they don't want to expose anybody else to it.
Maybe they live with someone who has, health conditions that make them especially vulnerable.
Sure. Or, just want it for themselves because, the vaccine does provide benefit and they don't want to get sick or they don't want to end up in the hospital. And yet they will not be able to get the vaccine without either finding a doctor who is willing to do that for them off-label, which is because the FDA does not actually allow for this, and maybe pay for it out of pocket. But now we're finding out that some pharmacies, CVS and Walgreens, of course, give out tons of shots for adults, and they're actually now saying that they won't carry the vaccine at all in these states because of what's going on. So, even in states where you are, in theory, able to get it, the reality is that when you have these kinds of rules, pharmacies are just reluctant to carry the vaccine. Not just the big chains, but even the smaller chains just don't want to get involved in this kind of thing because it's just too difficult. And then you also have, RFK Jr. has threatened doctors who go against the guidelines with, saying that they will not be protected from liability if they don't follow ACIP recommendations. So again, that's a real deterrent for any doctor. I mean, one thing that a lot of the COVID vaccine skeptics point to is that the guidelines now are closer to what they are in other countries. Of course, they very conveniently leave out the fact that in those countries, the vaccine is still approved for everyone. So they do actually have real choice. They can still get it if they want. And they also, many of them have national health care. So they're not worried about cost for themselves if they want the vaccine. So the circumstances are very different, partly because they have a safety net. They have a healthcare network that takes care of them.
We'll be right back after a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. With the weather getting cooler, if you're like me, you're looking around for a couple of new items for your wardrobe, like a new sweater, some cute new kicks. And Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I went over to Saks.com to check out what they've got on tap, and I gotta say, what I love about clicking around their website is that every piece looks special, one of a kind, as if you'd walk into the office or a party and instantly grab everyone's attention. All the big brands are there, stuff like Alice and Olivia, the young and trendy stuff. I love that I can see the care in every piece Saks has chosen for their fall collections. Each dress or pant or shoe feels a little bit elevated. So if you want shopping to be fun and easy, head over to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
This episode is brought to you by Planned Parenthood Federation of America. The state of reproductive rights might feel bleak, but the fight isn't over. At Planned Parenthood, they're holding the line, no matter what. Whether it's birth control, wellness exams, abortion access, cancer screenings, gender-affirming care, or expanded telehealth, Planned Parenthood continues to provide care, even now. Some lawmakers are trying to end abortion access, slash funding people rely on for care, and shut down Planned Parenthood health centers. These attacks only deepen the healthcare crisis they created, putting millions at risk. But here's the truth. Planned Parenthood has been there for over a century because of supporters like you. Planned Parenthood believes everyone should have the freedom to make decisions about their own bodies, no matter what. And that's something worth fighting for. The future isn't something that just happens. It's something that can be shaped. Planned Parenthood needs you in this fight. Donate today to support Planned Parenthood at plannedparenthood.org/defend.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. From improving emergency response times to protecting against cyber attacks, local, state, and federal governments are innovating with Google AI. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American innovation.
I wonder if it's worth talking about not just the CDC, but what's happening in the states when it comes to vaccines. Like, I was struck by the fact that last week, Florida came out and basically said, we will no longer require vaccines for you to participate in public life, whether that means like going to school or whatever else. And this is striking because vaccine mandates, they've been around for a long time. They've been controversial for a long time, but they're definitely a tool of public health to keep all kinds of people well. So when you heard about what was happening in Florida, I guess what was your reaction? And can you tell that story a little bit?
So Florida has a Surgeon General who has been very anti-vaccine for quite a while now. He has said many, many things about COVID vaccines that are not true. You know, even the measles vaccine, when there was an outbreak, he said that kids could come into school without being vaccinated. And it's not surprising that states are starting to go their own way. You know, states have always decided for themselves what to do with various health policies. But I think what has been important for them is to have this central voice, like the CDC voice, saying this is what we think is right. And then they can just follow that. Maybe they make minor tweaks here and there, but they essentially follow that. But when you have a situation where they can no longer trust what's coming from the federal government, then they are sort of forced to make their own decisions at a whole other level, where they have to actually review the evidence themselves and trust their own judgment in a way that they haven't had to. And so that's when you see, you know, Florida saying, well, I'm trusting my judgment and I don't think anybody needs to be vaccinated to come to school. But you're also seeing, you know, West Coast states, Washington, Oregon, and California said that they were going to review the evidence on their own. We're hearing about Northeast states doing that. New York is apparently going to follow its own thing. So this sort of mishmash was sort of predictable when, you know, the CDC stops being the voice, that's the central voice that they all listen to.
And next week, this Vaccine Advisory Committee, ACIP, is going to meet, right? Like, are they going to give further guidance? And then how do you think their guidance is going to be viewed, given the fact that RFK Jr. just showed up on the Hill and got beaten about the head by senators?
Well, you know, ACIP still has the power of law. But insurance companies are still going to cover what ACIP recommends. And there are many states whose recommendations, you know, the state level recommendations are very tied up with ACIP. Like their laws will say, you know, that they follow the ACIP guidelines pretty much as they are. And so for anybody to break with those recommendations, it would require some work.
Yeah. I mean, I just wonder if we're going to see a future where people travel to get vaccines, where one state looks very different than another state, and what that will mean, because of course we're all interconnected. States border each other. And so an outbreak one place doesn't necessarily stay in one place.
It doesn't at all. It doesn't, not just in one state, in one country. And the other thing to remember also is that a lot of the money that state health departments have comes from the CDC. So when that budget is cut, which it has been, they have less money and they have had to lay people off. So at the same time that they're being asked to make more decisions on their own, or they're having to make more decisions on their own, they have fewer people to do the work.
Yeah. And of course, with something like vaccines are all about prevention, and you don't see the benefit of them for a really long time. You're preventing a negative, So when an outbreak does happen, it may happen years after the vaccines are no longer as available. And it may be harder to draw that connection of like, here's why this happened,
Yeah. And I think something public health people say a lot is when we're doing our job right, you don't see us. So, when we start to see more measles outbreaks or God forbid, polio, I think that's when it'll become clear what was needed. And I think it'll also become more clear how intricate this network is. As you were saying, things go across states, they go across countries. So you can't dismantle global health and you can't dismantle federal health structures and still expect things to function okay at the local level. That's just not how it works.
We talked a little bit about how these policy decisions can impact availability. I wonder if like a decision by Florida, for instance, to say, we won't require vaccines. Do you think down the line that can translate to people being like, well, I guess we won't make as many vaccines because there's just not as much demand?
There's so much uncertainty, not just in terms of demand, but also because they have actually been directly threatened, right? There's conversation now about getting rid of the protections that vaccine makers have so that people can really sue these companies. And if that happens, vaccine makers are not going to stay in the business. It's actually not a moneymaker. Vaccines are not a moneymaker. And the only reason companies have stayed in the business is because of these protections, because of the guaranteed demand. If those things go away, they have zero incentive to stay and continue to make vaccines.
Yeah. I mean, I was struck by something the former head of the CDC, Susan Menares, wrote when she wrote her op-ed in the Wall Street Journal explaining her departure. She was clearly advocating for people to speak out against RFK Jr. And her last line was, if we act, the facts can still prevail. But I have to say, when I read that, I wondered if it was true. Because it seems to me that over the last 6 months or so, Robert Kennedy has installed a whole lot of people inside of his agencies and also driven a whole lot of people out. And I don't know if you can stop this train quite so easily.
I think you're right. I recently wrote a piece that was essentially asking this question, although centered pretty much on the CDC, and is the agency dying? And, when I pitched that story and I started reporting it, I thought I was going to hear a lot of people say, that's a bit of an overstatement. And here's what's still functioning well. But everyone I talked to, and I talked to a lot of people, said, yeah, that public health right now is sort of on its deathbed, that it needs immediate intervention. And even then, we are going to take a long time to come back to what used to be because people have left, because policies have changed, and so many things have changed. And as you pointed out, there are still people who are aligned with Robert Kennedy, who are still in the agencies. What they have said to me is that things are going to get a lot worse before they will get better. And maybe that means people actually see deaths from some of these infectious diseases that we kind of had forgotten about before there's enough outcry to change it. But at the moment, it's hard to see how any of this can bring things back in any sort of reasonable time frame.
When you've spoken to people about what happens now, is there anyone who has a vision for how to get out of the mess that we're in with vaccines at this moment?
Yeah, I can't say anybody has any easy solutions that they've mentioned to me.
Or even hard solutions.
Well, so one hard solution that I think has some hope of working, at least to some extent, is that there are medical organizations that are banding together, that are forming, coalition of sorts to issue guidance. And essentially they're forming a shadow ACIP. And the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, those are two of the organizations that really are important here, right? Kids and pregnant women. And they have both said that they don't agree with the ACIP recommendations. So one hope is that there are enough of these organizations that are respected that they will band together and that states will be able to look to them for guidance. Of course, it still won't solve the issue of insurance coverage, but I think that's sort of the best we can look at this point. And there are many efforts along those lines.
Apoorva, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Apoorva Mandavilli is a science and global health reporter at the New York Times. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Mia Lobel is the head of audio here at Slate. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. Say hey, I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. With the weather getting cooler, if you're like me, you're looking around for a couple of new items for your wardrobe, like a new sweater, some cute new kicks. And Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I went over to Saks.com to check out what they've got on tap, and I gotta say, what I love about clicking around their website is that every piece looks special, one of a kind, as if you'd walk into the office or a party and instantly grab everyone's attention. All the big brands are there, stuff like Alice and Olivia, the young and trendy stuff. I love that I can see the care in every piece Saks has chosen for their fall collections. Each dress or pant or shoe feels a little bit elevated. So if you want shopping to be fun and easy, head over to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
During that conversation, we're like, well, I wonder if it's the same with AI, right? Are we using a lot of power in AI that's not giving us a great benefit? And that's really what sort of kicked off a series of research efforts around this, trying to understand how do we make things more energy efficient?
So this was the 21st century equivalent of Newton's apple falling from a tree.
Join me, Chris Hadfield, on the On Energy podcast.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts.